Hello. Is this the correct height? I cannot tell. Great. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Alexis Wood. I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Berkeley. I study the co-creation of space at the intersection of rural right-wing sociopolitical movements, climate collapse, and social media. Why? Well, because I think this combination of things can tell us something important about how we theorize the creation of space, and more specifically, how we may or may not conceptualize distance and proximity. And in this, possibly better explain the dynamics of right-wing movements, the rural-urban divide, online communities, and how all of these things intersect. What does this have to do with maps? Well, we'll get there. But I need to give you a bit of background, keeping in mind that I'm summing up 2 years of research in a few minutes, as well as assumptions I'm asking from a few different affective and spatial theories. So with this, I'm primarily interested in a state secessionist movement in Northern California called the State of Jefferson, an iteration of a separatist movement which has been occurring and reoccurring since the state's foundation in 1850. This region of California, often called the Far North, is majority white, rural, impoverished, and composed of long-gone boom towns, ghosts of infrastructural WPA projects, and the state's logging industry, and swaths of government forest. This is a region that has been historically and overwhelmingly voting conservative, which checks with the general state and the general trend in state secessionist movements, and yes, there are a lot of them across the US. And some of you might know that in 2020, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, was facing a recall election fueled by the state's conservative parties. The media failed to pick up two really important things in this cycle. First, a huge proportion of votes by population came from the region, came from the region outlined as the state of Jefferson, and two, all the major campaigning for this recall occurred on Facebook groups dedicated to the state of Jefferson. On one side, we have a chloropleth map of the number of votes in relation to population density, so the percentage of the population in each county which signed this recall petition, and on the other, the map that used to be available on the State of Jefferson's webpage before they stopped paying for the web name. Whoever was in charge of that dropped the ball. And so this outline was solidified in 1951, and as well, it outlines what counties are and are not included in proposals alongside what they consider to be the state of Jefferson. And this gets sent to county and state officials quite frequently. And because we're at NACIS, I want to take a moment to mention I did have the intention to finally remake this map last night, but I did not. This was actually the first map I ever made while taking my first geospatial technologies class on Zoom, peak lockdown. So it's not great, but the data's there. And while the recall was unsuccessful in the end, it was very close. California's urban areas didn't take it seriously until about a week before the vote, realizing it was coming down to the wire. Through this process, I conducted a 4-month-long ethnography documenting activity on dozens of Facebook groups, trying to understand what fueled the recall, and then this, why the state of Jefferson was a reality for so many. So my conclusion from this was that the state of Jefferson is a crystallization of what Raymond Williams calls a structure of feeling. This is a narrative structure for understanding material limits to change, or in other words, how one settled and conditioned within these particular structures will necessarily be influenced by them. These structures, he argued, are not distinct and immediately available like ideology, but rather they are murky and to some degree ineffable, unable to be properly articulated until we can look back on the crystallization of that period. Sitting within an unresolvable tension between the experienced and the articulable are 2 points. While the process in motion is not articulable, feeling itself, anger, anxiety, joy, fear, is identifiable. And second, feelings, sometimes the most unreasonable aspects of the human experience, have, as Ruth Gilmore says, dynamically substantive shape. Ruth. They are embedded into the landscape. In turn, these intangible structures heavily shape the experience, or more importantly, limit conceptions of possibility. So what does this mean in the context of the recall itself? And what does this theory mean in the context of political polarization, in the context of rapidly changing physical landscape, accompanied with intense visceral uncertainty and anxiety? To push on this, we have to understand space is dynamic. Of course. Dorian Massey, in my favorite paper of hers, Traveling Thoughts, states, space is a configuration, a simultaneity of multiplicity of trajectories. The coexisting multiplicity and the necessary but incomplete potential interrelatedness which that entails to give rise to time and space together. You are not just traveling across space, you are altering it a little, moving it on, producing it. The relations that constitute it are being reproduced in an always slightly altered form. So from here, what does that mean, and what are the structures of feeling once digital or digitalities comes into focus? When we take seriously the emotion carried on the internet, particularly social media, this person, I think my slides might be out of order, guys. This is what I get for doing it the day of. This person states in this Facebook post, while I'm in the same state as you, I feel a world away. They describe anxiety and uncertainty. The question is not just how these feelings are expressed in digital space, reformed digital space, but rather how these feelings expressed in digital space are forming and reforming those intangible structures of feeling. This is not just a question about right-wing secessionism, but the fundamental ways in which we understand the relationship between the digital and the physical, and how this space, how we all in this room navigate through the world. So I'm a digital geographer, and I know we have other digital geographers in the room, like an abnormal amount of digital geographers for a room of people outside of AAG. And the idea of intermingling physical and digital space is something we struggle with constantly. Is it hybrid space, digiplace, smart space? What we struggle with most is trying to retain a boundary and delineation even when we can't quite place our finger on it. We try to make things neat and organized, but placing these boundaries necessarily limits our own conceptions of possibility when theorizing. Now I gotta find. Emma Fraser, in her recent paper, The Future of Digital Space, says, the internet as we know it is presently transforming from a participatory media environment navigated via tabs and swipes into a digital space that we navigate via moving avatars or other dimensional means. Bolter understood the early internet as spatializing because of the way that it reconfigured text from a linear to a multi-branching form. Early internet discourse invented terms, browsing, navigating, surfing, that stood in as metaphors for the sensation of moving in a virtual information environment. The coming internet expands this spatiality into multiple worlds and media. What does this spatial dynamic mean for the future of geography as a discipline? And I think that's a really good question. If we broke down the distinction between the real and the virtual and understood these relationships as spatial phenomena instead, what possibilities are open for us? And for me in particular, what would this mean for the spatiality of the state of Jefferson? Why do these people push for this particular sort of territorialization? I took this screenshot a few days after January 6th, the insurrection on the US Capitol, shared on one of the State of Jefferson public Facebook groups. When I point out a tension between digital and physical space, I am speaking of a lack of explicit understanding in regards to what is happening around us, not just us in this room. This photo illustrates the untranslatability between the rural and the urban, the real and the digital, truth and fake news, and a resulting righteous frustration and anger. This is not just about a single recall election, state secessionism, climate crisis, the failures of neoliberalism, but a foreshadowing of the confluence of space that we need a language to understand and approach an issue of untranslatability. Using the state of Jefferson and Northern California as a case study, I bring together digital landscapes, physical landscapes, and political landscapes. We fundamentally have space at the end of all of this, in a very much Massian sense. But how to read these things together, how to approach them in an egalitarian manner and witness them, physicality and the felt and the digital always in relation with one another. How do we do this? The process and the serious emphasis here on the word of process, of erosion and deposition. All of these landscapes operate on such different scales and temporalities, but co-construct space. How much time do I have? Great. And something that drives me a little crazy about my department in particular is that the human geographers and the physical geographers do not speak to one another. We've isolated ourselves, but the funny thing is we use exactly the same language. Landscapes refuse to be disciplined. They make a mockery of the oppositions that we create between time and space, or between nature and culture. So what we must do is return to space, return to process, and space as process. We could speak about the intricacies of democratic erosion under a functioning democracy, entertained with physical erosion that comes after a wildfire, transfigurations between spatial forms as chemical erosion, 404 errors and lost tweets and non-functioning platforms as digital erosion. All of these things have a spatial relationship with one another. In my instance, we see all of these and more. It is a process of displacement and reclamation, is the spatial exercise of territorialization and deterritorialization. And this political polarization, social political situation of a state secessionist movement, if anything, it's an exercise concerned with territory that is simultaneously digital, physical, and emotional. And I know we're running out of time, and you're probably still wondering, what does this have to do with maps? That's fair. But what I'm telling you is not just about abstract thought, but there are material consequences that follow from it. Maps are agents in world building. They create, morph, destroy. They can be agents of joy or violence, colonialism and capitalism or community. These are worldings in themselves. The standards of our maps cannot hold these critical aspects and flows of space, particularly in a period where space, in an age of digitalities and climate crisis, has become more intense. What kinds of worlds are we producing when we, by standard, invisibilize effective dynamics and process? How can we represent these complex, fractal, in-process space as it is? This is not about making a one-to-one map, but being able to illustrate and communicate with maps the incalculable and the felt, structures of feeling, flows of erosion and deposition. I call to recenter space in cartography because cartography, the map, is a powerful agent in reshaping and reimagining our worlds. I want to end on this map because I don't think the point here is for me to give you a definitive answer, at least not yet, but to offer these entrances and tensions between spatial theory and materiality and cartography. This is a map created by Clancy Wilmot, and partially me, in collaboration with the Segorite Land Trust, a woman-led Ohlone land trust. In our map, we recentered space, we recentered relations, and it produces a weird but good cartography, weird but good worldings, providing agency to those things and those people and those relationships which have been traditionally silenced. Oh, thanks, Clancy. I meant to say thank you. Yeah, hi.
Thank you so much, Alexis. That was wonderful. I have a question for you about the changing nature of social media right now and kind of accessing these people in your kind of case study of Jefferson and how that is changing as Twitter morphs into whatever and Facebook is difficult to access when you're not part of certain groups.
Thank you, Carolyn. Her question was about how sort of the changing landscapes of social media are making it more or less, or probably more difficult for me to sort of access the people that I'm working with. And I get around that mostly because I have a lot of interpersonal relationships up north. So it is a process of me going to do field work and hanging out with people while they use social media and do these sort of things like a campaign for the state of Jefferson or one of their guys who's currently running for the California Senate, and seeing how they use social media to, I guess, make claims of territory and identity. Yeah, but it is getting more difficult because you have to keep up with them. They move a lot faster than me. So the double X on the gold pan is a double crossing of the capital cities of California and Oregon, so Salem and Sacramento. They double cross the rural regions in those states. So it's supposed to be clever. And it's on a gold pan itself, which is even better, I think, personally. But it was a part of a school age competition where basically they put out a call and all these kids submitted logos and this one kid won, so that's his logo.